Когда я был маленьким, существовало одно место. Его закрыли, оставили гнить. Но то, что обитало там...
Привет, Дэнни.
Возвращается.
Shining was about hopelessness. And the new one, personally, for me, is about empowerment. How did you feel? Did Mike Flэнeghan give you that sort of direction from the get-go?
Well, he always talks about The Shining being a book and a movie about, well, the book more about alcoholism, about addiction, about living with addiction, be it either yourself or the child of a parent who's an addict, and that Stephen King then went on to write a novel which is much more about recovery, about freeing yourself from that addiction. And Stephen King, of course, he materializes those things that we don't want to face in ourselves, in that there are ghosts or like ghouls who come to life in front of you, but they could just be, that could be a metaphor for just our inner selves, and that we can't live with it. We're ashamed of ourselves, we're scared of ourselves, we're scared of these things, so we drink and drink and drink so we don't ever have to face it. And that's what Danny's doing. And then something happens, he meets somebody, he's just has this rock bottom, and he realizes he's either gonna die or there's another path, and luckily he goes to the other path.
It was important to me that this movie be as much, while it is a celebration of The Shining and a celebration of Kubrick, it's still also kind of carving its own path in the way that Dan is not Jack and Abra is not Dan. There's a natural optimism in the way that Stephen King views the world. And I think in this story in particular, it bubbled up to the surface in the novel in a way that I felt like it was the only way to approach the film.
Привет. Прочь из моей головы! Убирай! Я не ощущала подобной силы так долго.
How good was the feeling of actually being the very strong character in the movie, where in Shining, deliberately, the female character was very much vulnerable.
Really? I saw Wendy as such a strong force because, one, she's a mom and she's with her 5-year-old and she's getting him through this. She put her kid before herself, and I saw Wendy as a very strong girl. I took a lot of Wendy's personality for Abra, actually. I feel like they're very alike, and that's what I used for Abra. It feels good.
I think what's also quite important to see is Stephen King has written these characters, and when you read and you look at the films, there was a reason to the vulnerability of the mother's character back then, and also how Stephen King wrote the strength of Rose the Hat, of Snakebite Andy, of Kylie's character, of all of these characters. And it's not for no reason that he's doing it. I mean, thankfully. And also quite wonderful to be a part of. But I think what is really important for me is when I read the script, it didn't stand out to me that this was a film about female power. This wasn't a film about masculine power. This was about, it's about recovery, it's about death, it's about human beings, it's about loneliness and sadness, and that all of us have an expiration date, even though, we try not to.
Куда мы едем?
Есть одно место.
Поиграй с нами.
Stephen King had said something that Kubrick was cold and he was warm. This is why the hotel in The Shining actually freezes over, and in the book it burns.
Right.
So did you feel that in the interaction with Stephen?
I don't think it's as simple as that, because King can be very cold and Kubrick can be very warm. It all depends. But I do think that that's a really effective way to look at their approach to that particular story in a big way. And the thing that always struck me was that, The Shining was written because Stephen King was afraid of what his alcoholism could do to his family. That's what he was scared of, what he could do if he didn't get his drinking under control. In his version of it, Jack Torrance, when he finally is about to hurt Danny, he can't do it. That his better instincts as a father overcome that madness, and he sacrifices himself to save his family. And in Kubrick's version, not even for a second does he look back, which is scarier. You know, that's a much scarier look at it. And I can see how that could be something for Stephen King that would hit too close to home. You know, that's something he doesn't want to think about, or didn't want to think about at the time. They're both fascinating perspectives on that kind of addiction and madness and what it can do to a family.
What was your introduction to Stephen King's world?
Well, I'd heard of him before we started shooting the movie, but I really got to know him before starting. Like, just before, right before the callback. I watched The Shining. And then I started to read his books. Yeah, the movie started it all.
How do you feel about actually watching The Shining?
It was terrifying. Truly terrifying. I had nightmares for days. I was hiding behind my dad's back the whole time we were watching it.
Привет. Ты слышишь меня? Ты волшебный, как и я.
Не знаю насчет волшебства. Я всегда называл это сиянием.
There's a feeling in that movie, personally for me, that you have a hopefulness for the place of the man in the world, basically the existential crisis of Jack Nicholson in the first movie resulted in domestic violence, to be simple about it, basically. But in this movie, we have several ways to actually be hopeful about the future. So was it the direction that you were kind of given in the first place by?
Well, that's the beauty of being Mike, isn't it? The layers that he can create with the, you know, the philosophy and the mannerism of the abused wife, of alcoholism, of things that we battle. Not me per se, but we all have things we battle with, and this is what the beauty of storytelling is. You know, I took things for my character that she's been through, you know, depression being the best time in her life, you know. But yes, I mean, there are so many subtle hints in this film. My character, I feel, do not represent the beauty of recovery or addiction, really, in the sense. I feel like Dan's character is going through more of that, the difficulties and the changes and the, you know, existential questions, you know?
I don't know if it's necessarily about being a man in the world. I don't think so. It's just about being a human being in the world, and how you deal with what you've gone through and the things that have hurt you, and how do you deal with it? And he's trying not to deal with them by drinking, but he eventually, this innocent young person finds him, this girl Abra, and she meets him psychically, and they become sort of odd psychic pen pals. Like, they leave little messages for each other. But she needs his help, and she needs him to face his biggest fears in order to help her, to help in a very major way. And he's so scared of it. He doesn't want to. He denies. She finds him for real eventually, and he sends her away. He says he can't help her, and then he has a visitor from his past who makes him realize that he has to. There's nothing that. What kind of human being is he if he doesn't help this other human being? And so he has to do it, and in fact, it's what makes him whole again. It's what makes him live properly, is by being helpful to this other person.
Dan is what happens when someone is violently removed from their family. You know, the family in Dr. Sleep exists entirely in Dan's memory. You know, he's someone alone in the world, and you can see what that isolation does to him, how that disconnection, how that breakdown of the safety of the nuclear family has changed him and shaped him as an adult. He has to go about the hardest work that grown-ups have, which is to build a family. You know, the family we're born into that we have no control over defines us. so that we can then build the family that's going to be ours as adults. And that generational theme, because so much time went by between when King wrote The Shining and wrote Dr. Sleep, a lot of that was laid out for me in a very, very magical way by Stephen King. So it was less daunting to follow that roadmap than it would have been to try to change it, I think.
In a way, you kind of represent the different version of him when he was a child. It's sort of like you inherit some of his qualities. In the same time, you're completely different. What was your approach to actually playing your character?
I took a lot from Wendy and Danny. Really, I put myself as the opposite of Dan. Someone who embraces her shine and is really innocent, but she wants to do anything for anyone. She's very good. And I think she's very different from Dan because one, she embraces her shine. Two, she's very caring and loving, and Dan hides away. Three, there's a lot of things. Abra loves everyone, and she doesn't want to hurt anyone, except for the True Knot because they're evil. And Dan is very hidden and closed up.
О, да, беги, дорогуша. А я найду тебя и заставлю кричать всю жизнь.